Imagine a serial killer so elusive he could commit heinous crimes and walk amongst us undetected. This is the chilling story of the Chameleon Killer. In the grim annals of crime, the Chameleon Killer occupies a dark corner all his own. He didn't just take lives, he assumed identities, slipping in and out of personas as easily as one might change clothes. The sheer audacity of his actions struck fear into the heart of the community, a terror that was only magnified by the seemingly endless parade of faces he wore. His crimes were chilling, a series of brutal murders that left a trail of devastation in their wake. Yet it wasn't the violence that truly set him apart. It was his unparalleled ability to transform, to become anyone and anything. He was a master of deception, an expert at mimicry. He could be your neighbor, your co-worker, even a friend, and you'd never realize the danger lurking beneath the facade. With each new identity, he left the authorities floundering in his wake. He was always one step ahead, always hidden in plain sight. It felt as though he was everywhere and nowhere, a ghostly figure that could never be pinned down. This was the power of the Chameleon Killer. He didn't just instill fear, he embodied it. He was the boogeyman of our nightmares, the monster under the bed, and like those childhood terrors, he seemed impossible to catch. Yet, he was more than just a figure of fear. He was a stark reminder of our own vulnerability, of the ease with which a person could slip through the cracks of our perception. He exploited the trust we place in the familiar, turning it into a weapon as deadly as any knife or gun. The Chameleon Killer, a name that still sends shivers down our spines, was just getting started. The Chameleon Killer's reign of terror began in earnest, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the body count steadily rose. The victims were as diverse as they were numerous: young, old, men, women, wealthy, poor. No one seemed immune to the chameleon's deadly touch. The randomness of the victims painted a chilling picture of a predator who was seemingly everywhere and nowhere at once. The killer's ability to blend in and disappear without a trace earned him the moniker of the Chameleon. As the killings continued unabated, a pall of fear descended over the community. Parents kept their children indoors, neighbors viewed each other with suspicion, and every stranger became a potential threat. The pressure on law enforcement was immense. With each passing day, the demand for justice grew louder. Yet despite their best efforts, the identity of the Chameleon Killer remained elusive. The predator was always one step ahead, leaving no clear patterns or clues behind. The investigators found themselves in a race against time, as the body count kept rising. Yet the Chameleon Killer was more than just a murderer. He was a specter that haunted the city, his faceless presence a reminder of the fragility of life and the dark underbelly of humanity. But as the list of victims grew longer, so did the resolve of the community. They refused to live in fear, choosing instead to band together, providing support and comfort to each other in these dark times. The community's resilience became a beacon of hope amidst the chaos, a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and rise above even the most horrific circumstances. The Chameleon Killer's spree was more than just a series of heinous crimes. It was a stark reminder of the darkness that lurks within our society, and the collective strength we possess to confront it. With each passing day, the Chameleon Killer's shadow grew longer, his identity remaining an enigma. As the death toll rose, so did the determination of the detectives on the case. They knew they were dealing with an enigma, a chameleon who could blend into the crowd while leaving a trail of terror. The task was daunting, but they were resolute. The first breakthrough came when they started noticing patterns in the killings. The victims were all seemingly unrelated from different walks of life, but they shared a common thread. They were all loners, people who wouldn't be missed immediately, giving the killer ample time to change identities and disappear into thin air. The method was chillingly calculated. The killer would assume a new identity, get close to the victim, and then strike without warning. After the deed, the killer would discard that persona like a used costume and move on to the next one. The detectives realized they were not just hunting a killer, but also a master of disguise. This realization prompted them to reach out to experts in behavioral sciences. Profilers were brought in to help anticipate the killer's next move, to decode the psyche of a man who could kill without remorse and then slip into another life as easily as changing clothes. The task force also started working with forensic experts. They hoped that the killer, in his many guises, would leave behind some trace of his true self. Despite the meticulous planning, every criminal makes a mistake, and they were banking on this. They pieced together a profile from the clues left behind at the crime scenes and the shared characteristics of the victims. They had a rough sketch of the killer's psyche, his modus operandi, and his choice of victims. But the Chameleon Killer was a slippery adversary, ever changing, ever morphing. He was a shadow in the crowd, a face in the multitude. Despite their best efforts, the Chameleon Killer remained elusive, always one step ahead of the law. The investigation was intense, the chase relentless, but the real challenge was to unmask the chameleon, to see the man behind the many faces. In a twist of fate, the Chameleon Killer's greatest strength was also his downfall. This elusive figure, known for his ability to blend into any crowd, to assume any identity, had finally met a crossroad in his dark journey. It was no ordinary day for the investigators when they stumbled upon an unanticipated lead. A series of irregularities in identification documents, a pattern of false identities crafted with such meticulousness that it almost bordered on obsession. Each identity was a new mask, a new face that the chameleon wore, hiding behind the anonymity of ordinary life. As they delved deeper, they found a trail of breadcrumbs that the killer had unknowingly left behind. Every fake alias, every forged document was a piece of the puzzle that gradually began to form a picture. The chameleon, a master of deception, had been leaving behind traces of his true identity with every transformation. The turning point in the investigation arrived with a newfound understanding of the chameleon's modus operandi. The realization that he wasn't just changing identities, he was living them. Each alias had a life of its own, a story crafted with such precision that it was almost indistinguishable from reality. But it was in these stories that the investigators found the thread that would lead them to the chameleon. The investigators started to connect the dots. They cross-referenced the aliases, the lives that the chameleon had lived, and found a common thread. A thread that led to a man who was as ordinary as he was extraordinary. A man who could be anyone, be anywhere, and yet was nowhere to be found. The chameleon had been playing a dangerous game of hide and seek, and the investigators were closing in. The net was tightening, the walls were closing in. It was only a matter of time before the faceless murderer was unmasked. The chameleon had finally been cornered, but the true horror of his crimes was yet to be revealed. The man behind the masks, the phantom in the crowd, was about to step into the light. The Chameleon Killer, the elusive specter that had haunted the community, was finally in custody. The capture of the Chameleon Killer was a triumph of relentless detective work and public vigilance. This elusive phantom had danced in the shadows, leaving a trail of terror in his wake. But now the dance was over. The authorities had finally cornered the chameleon, and the spotlight was on him. The community breathed a collective sigh of relief. Their nightmare was drawing to a close. The trial was a spectacle that gripped the nation. The courtroom was a stage, and the Chameleon Killer, the star actor. Every twitch of his face, every flicker of his eyes was scrutinized, studied, and interpreted. The public was fascinated and horrified in equal measure. This was the man who had been the faceless terror, the man of 1,000 faces. His defense was as intricate as his crimes. He wove a web of half-truths and misdirections, trying to paint himself as the victim. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution laid out the case methodically, piece by piece, like a jigsaw puzzle. The picture that emerged was chilling. The Chameleon Killer was not a victim but a predator who had played a deadly game and lost. His conviction was met with a wave of relief. Justice had prevailed. The Chameleon Killer, once the embodiment of fear, was now just a man behind bars. The community could now start to heal, to rebuild, but the scars remained. The fear he had instilled was not easily forgotten. The Chameleon Killer had been more than a murderer. He had been a specter, a phantom that had haunted their dreams. His capture and conviction had removed the immediate threat, but the memory of the Chameleon Killer would linger. His legacy was a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind any face, even the face of a neighbor. The Chameleon Killer, once an enigma, was now just a man who had brought fear and terror to a community and would now pay the price for his crimes.